The rain had been falling for 3 hours when Marcus Reed realized he had exactly $11 left in his wallet, 2 sleeping children in the back seat, and nowhere to take them. He stared through the windshield at the small roadside motel glowing beneath a broken neon sign, wondering how a man could work 2 jobs, pay every bill he could, and still end up one bad week away from losing everything. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, slept with her cheek against the window, while his 5-year-old son, Noah, hugged a faded stuffed bear with one ear missing. Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat and whispered a prayer that his children would never understand how frightened their father was. He had not planned to be homeless that night. A burst pipe had flooded the tiny apartment they rented, destroying most of their belongings and making the place unsafe. Marcus had spent the entire day trying to find another apartment, but every landlord wanted a deposit he simply couldn't afford. His paycheck was still 4 days away. The mechanic shop where he worked during the day had cut his hours, and his evening delivery shifts barely covered food, electricity, and his children's school expenses. He had considered sleeping in the car, but the temperature was dropping quickly, and he couldn't bear the thought of his children waking up cold. If you believe kindness can change a person's life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of a completely different life. Marcus walked into the motel office and asked for the cheapest room available. The elderly clerk checked the computer and shook his head apologetically. There was only one room left, but the price was slightly higher because of the storm. Marcus counted his money again. He was short by $12. His shoulders sank, and for a moment he simply stood there, staring at the counter. Then the motel door opened behind him. A woman entered wearing a soaked black business suit, carrying a leather briefcase in one hand and a phone in the other. She looked exhausted rather than powerful, but Marcus recognized her immediately. Even though he had never spoken to her outside the office, he knew that face. Victoria Hale was the CEO of Hale Technologies, the company where Marcus worked as a night maintenance supervisor 3 nights a week. She had no idea who he was. Victoria approached the desk and asked for a room. The clerk looked embarrassed and explained that there was only one room left. Marcus immediately stepped aside. He told the clerk that she should take it. He would figure something out. Victoria noticed the children behind him. She noticed the wet clothes, the tired eyes, and the way Marcus quietly pulled his wallet closed so his daughter wouldn't see how little money was inside. She asked him what was wrong. Marcus didn't want to explain. Pride had protected him through years of hardship, especially since his wife had died after a sudden illness 4 years earlier. Since then, he had learned to smile when he was exhausted, work when he was sick, and tell his children everything was fine when it wasn't. But that night, the truth slipped out. He explained that their apartment had flooded, that he had been unable to find another place, and that he was short $12 for the room. Victoria looked at the clerk, then at Marcus, and quietly paid for the room. Marcus thanked her and immediately said he couldn't accept anything else. Victoria told him she wasn't giving him charity. She was simply making sure 2 children had a warm place to sleep. Then came the unexpected part. The motel had mistakenly double-booked the room. The clerk apologized and explained that the room had 2 beds, but there were no other rooms available anywhere nearby because the storm had forced dozens of travelers onto the road. Marcus immediately said he and the children would sleep in the car. Victoria refused. She told him they would share the room, with Marcus and the children taking one bed while she used the other. Marcus hesitated, uncomfortable with the situation, but the children were exhausted. Finally, he accepted. That night changed both of their lives. The room was small, with faded curtains, an old television, and rain tapping against the window. Lily woke briefly and asked Marcus whether they were going home tomorrow. He smiled and told her they would be okay. Victoria watched silently from the other bed as Marcus tucked his children under the blanket. She saw something she had rarely seen in her own life, a man who was struggling terribly but was still more concerned about making his children feel safe than admitting he was afraid. Later, after the children fell asleep, Marcus quietly walked to the window. Victoria asked him how long he had been raising them alone. He said 4 years. He told her his wife had been the kindest person he had ever known and that before she died, she made him promise never to let their children believe the world was a cruel place. Victoria asked whether he believed that promise was still possible. Marcus looked at his sleeping children and said he wasn't sure. But he was going to try anyway. Victoria turned away so he wouldn't see her tears. She had spent 15 years building Hale Technologies into a multi-million-dollar company. She had boardrooms, private drivers, expensive homes, and people who answered her calls at every hour. Yet that night, sitting in a cheap motel room beside a man who had $11 left to his name, she realized how lonely her success had made her. Marcus had something she couldn't buy. He had people who needed him. And they loved him. The next morning, Marcus woke before sunrise. He found Victoria already awake, staring at the rain-covered window. She told him she wanted him to come to her office after his shift. Marcus immediately became nervous. He assumed she had discovered he had been working additional hours outside his contract and planned to fire him. Instead, when Marcus arrived at Hale Technologies that afternoon, Victoria introduced him to the company's senior leadership team. She told them that the company had a serious problem. They had employees who were working hard while silently drowning in personal emergencies. Marcus was only one example. She announced the creation of an emergency assistance program for employees facing housing crises, medical emergencies, childcare problems, or unexpected disasters. The company would provide temporary financial support, counseling, housing assistance, and flexible scheduling. Marcus stood speechless. Then Victoria did something even more unexpected. She offered him a promotion. She had learned that Marcus had been fixing broken equipment at night, helping younger employees, and quietly repairing things other supervisors ignored. She told him that leadership wasn't about sitting in an office. Sometimes leadership meant staying late because somebody else needed help. She offered Marcus the position of facilities operations manager. The salary was nearly double what he had been making. Marcus struggled to accept. He said he hadn't earned it. Victoria looked directly at him and told him that was exactly why he had. Months passed. Marcus moved with Lily and Noah into a small but comfortable home. For the first time in years, the refrigerator was full, the lights stayed on without fear, and his children had bedrooms of their own. Lily joined a dance class. Noah finally got the bicycle he had been asking for. But Marcus never forgot the motel. Neither did Victoria. Their relationship slowly changed from employer and employee into something more meaningful. Marcus became one of the few people who could tell Victoria when she was making a mistake without worrying about losing his job. Victoria became someone Marcus trusted enough to admit when he was overwhelmed. One evening, nearly a year after the storm, Victoria visited Marcus's home. Lily had prepared a handmade card for her. Noah proudly showed her his school project. Marcus stood in the kitchen watching them laugh together, and suddenly understood that the night he thought his life had fallen apart had actually been the night everything began to change. But the greatest surprise came later. Victoria told Marcus that she had been considering leaving the company. She felt exhausted and disconnected from the life she had built. Marcus reminded her that she didn't have to choose between success and being human. He told her that sometimes a person doesn't need a new life. Sometimes they simply need to remember why their old life mattered. Victoria stayed. She transformed Hale Technologies into a company known not only for its profits but for how it treated people. And Marcus helped her build that culture from the inside. Years later, when someone asked Marcus what had changed his life, he never mentioned the promotion or the salary. He talked about a rainy night. He talked about $11. He talked about 2 frightened children. And he talked about a woman who could have taken the last room without asking questions but instead chose to notice a struggling father standing beside her. Marcus often told people that kindness didn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it was simply paying $12. Sometimes it was sharing a room. Sometimes it was looking at someone who felt invisible and saying, without judgment, that they mattered. And Victoria would always correct him. She would say that Marcus had changed her life too. Because she had walked into that motel believing she was the person with everything. She walked out realizing she had been missing the most important thing of all. Connection. Years later, Lily would keep the old motel receipt inside a wooden box. Noah would keep the stuffed bear with one ear missing. And Marcus would keep the $12 bill Victoria had once placed on the counter beside his $11. He never spent it. Not because it was valuable. Because it reminded him that sometimes life changes in the smallest moment, when someone chooses compassion instead of looking away. And if this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that kindness still matters, and subscribe for more stories about hope, second chances, and the unexpected ways people change each other's lives. Before we end, comment, kindness changes everything, if you believe one small act of compassion can completely change someone's future. Because Marcus went to that motel believing he had reached the lowest point of his life. He left knowing something he would never forget: sometimes the darkest night isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's the night someone finally turns on the light.